May 2026 intro. May 2026 has a very different rhythm. It begins deep. The month opens with a Scorpio full moon on May 1st, so something intense shows itself immediately. A truth, a power dynamic, a financial issue, or an emotional undercurrent becomes harder to ignore. This is not a light beginning. It makes hidden material visible. Then the energy grounds out. Mercury enters Taurus on May 2nd, and the middle of the month starts building through Taurus. The pace slows down, but it gets more serious. The new moon in Taurus on May 16th starts a new chapter in the Taurus house of your chart. So this is where something becomes practical, tangible, and worth building properly. But May does not stay still for long. Mercury enters Gemini on May 17th. Mars enters Taurus on May 18th. Venus enters Cancer later that same day. By May 20th, Gemini season begins. So the second half of the month starts splitting into two stories at once. One part of life needs stability, while another part speeds up, gets louder, and starts asking more questions. Then the month ends by opening the horizon. There is a second full moon on May 31st, this time in Sagittarius. So May closes with perspective, movement, and release. What started in Scorpio as something private, loaded, or emotionally concentrated ends in Sagittarius as a truth, a decision, a wider view, or a need for freedom. So this month moves from depth to structure to motion. First, you see what is real. Then you decide what can last. Then by the end of May, the story gets bigger. This is May 2026 for all 12 rising signs. And if this helps you, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me for the next one. Aries rising. May begins in a place you cannot fake your way through. The full moon in Scorpio on May 1st lands in your 8th house. So the month does not open with light energy, casual motivation, or easy momentum. It opens with depth, shared money, emotional entanglement, trust, obligations, debts, intimacy, power dynamics. The parts of life that get very real, very fast, the second something is no longer balanced. That is where the month starts for you. So right away, something underneath the surface becomes harder to ignore. For some Aries rising people, this is financial. A payment, a debt, a tax issue, a support issue, or a money situation tied to another person starts asking for a cleaner answer. For others, this is emotional. You realize a dynamic has become too heavy, too loaded, too dependent, too unclear, or too expensive on an energetic level. And for some of you, it is both at once, because the 8th house loves to mix emotional reality with practical reality and then act like that is somehow surprising. It is not surprising. It is the whole point. The beginning of May is showing you where the deeper exchange is no longer neutral. Who owes what? Who gives more? Who holds the power? Who is carrying the emotional weight? Who is more invested? Who is more exposed? And whether the arrangement underneath all of that is actually sustainable. That is why this full moon matters. It is not just dramatic. It is revealing. And for Aries rising, that matters because you usually know how to move when the problem is obvious. What is harder is staying patient long enough to understand the real problem before reacting to the loudest symptom. Early May asks for exactly that. Do not rush to solve the discomfort before you understand what the discomfort is telling you. Then the month begins to slow down, and strangely that helps. Mercury enters Taurus on May 2nd, which moves the mental focus into your second house of money, income, expenses, value, possessions, and self-worth. Then the Taurus new moon on May 16th starts a new cycle in that same part of your chart. So after the month opens in the deep water of the 8th house, the middle of May begins trying to stabilize your footing. It moves you out of emotional intensity and into something much more practical. What is actually yours? What is actually supporting you? And what needs to become more solid? This is a very important shift because the first part of the month can easily make you feel like the story is about pressure, exposure, or some complicated emotional reality. But the middle of the month quietly changes the question. It stops asking, what is the problem? And starts asking, what can you build now that you see the problem clearly? That is better, much better, because Taurus energy is slower than yours, but it is not weaker. It is steadier. It wants real ground. It wants numbers that make sense. It wants plans that can survive the mood of the moment. It wants value that is not hypothetical. And for Aries rising, this is exactly where the month becomes useful. The new moon on the 16th is your reset point around money, security, and self-respect. A new earning chapter can begin here. A new pricing model, a new income goal, a new spending discipline, a better relationship to your own standards, a stronger line around what is and is not worth your time. A very practical decision that says, from this point on, I need my life to hold me better than it has been holding me. And honestly, that may be the real May story for Aries rising. Not the drama at the beginning, the correction that comes after it. Because once you see where the deeper drain is, the next move is not to obsess over the drain forever. The next move is to strengthen your own position. That is what the middle of May wants from you. More stability, better use of resources, cleaner priorities, less leakage. And then, because the universe apparently does not want you getting too comfortable in one speed for too long, the tempo changes again. Mercury enters Gemini on May 17th. Mars enters Taurus on May 18th. Venus enters Cancer the same day. Then Gemini season begins on May 20th. So by the second half of May, the month starts splitting into layers. One part of your life is still trying to become steadier and more grounded, while another part suddenly speeds up through communication, movement, admin, messages, short trips, decisions, errands, and the sheer amount of mental traffic around you. This is where the month gets busy. And for Aries rising, busy can feel good. It can feel like momentum. It can feel like life returning. It can feel like finally getting moving again after something heavy. But this is also where the caution matters. Because Mars enters Taurus on the 18th, and that means your second house is no longer just thoughtful and practical. It is now activated, energized, pressurized. You may become much more motivated to make money, fix money, defend your time, protect your peace, and stop tolerating waste. That can be excellent. It can make you decisive in all the right ways. But it can also make you react strongly to anything that feels inefficient, expensive, disrespectful, or draining. So if the middle of the month helps you get serious about your standards, the second half makes those standards louder. You may become less patient with undercharging, less patient with chaos, less patient with people who need too much and offer too little, less patient with your own bad habits around spending, urgency, or depletion. That is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, for many Aries rising people, that is the breakthrough. The month starts by showing you the cost of a messy exchange. Then it spends the middle rebuilding your sense of value. Then the second half gives you the will to act like that value is real. That is a strong arc. At the same time, Mercury in Gemini and Gemini season activate your third house, so communication becomes a major part of how this plays out. Conversations matter. Decisions matter. Information moves quickly. You may be sending more, answering more, sorting more, negotiating more, and generally dealing with a lot more motion than you were earlier in the month. That can help a lot, because once your values are clearer, your words tend to get clearer too. And that is one of the hidden strengths of late May for Aries rising. You do not just feel what is wrong anymore. You can name it. You can explain it. You can state terms. You can ask better questions. You can spot weak logic faster. You can make the right small decisions that keep the larger situation from sliding backward. Then Venus enters Cancer on May 18th, which brings a softer influence into your fourth house of home, family, comfort, and emotional grounding. This matters more than it first appears, because without that, the month could become all pressure, productivity, and reaction. Venus in Cancer gives you a place to exhale. It reminds you that safety is not only financial, it is emotional too. The quality of your home life matters. The way your body feels in your own space matters. The people who calm your nervous system matter. Peace matters. And by the time you reach the end of the month, the story changes one more time. The full moon in Sagittarius on May 31st lands in your ninth house. That is your release point, your perspective point, your horizon opening moment. After everything earlier in the month about depth, entanglement, money, standards, and practical reality, this full moon asks a bigger question. Where is your life trying to go now? Travel, education, legal matters, publishing, truth, worldview, future direction, and the need for wider space all come into focus here. This is why May has such a clear shape for you. It starts compressed, then it gets grounded, then it gets busy, and it ends by opening. The month begins with something heavy, private, or emotionally loaded becoming impossible to ignore. Then it helps you build a more stable position around money, value, and self-respect. Then it speeds life back up, but with more clarity and better standards than you had before. And by the end of May, it reminds you that all of this practical correction is not only about control. It is about freedom, more range, more truth, more movement, a bigger horizon than the one you started the month with. For Aries rising, the key is simple. Do not panic at the intensity of the opening. It is showing you where the drain is. Do not waste the middle of the month by staying emotionally tangled when the chart is clearly trying to make you stronger, steadier, and more expensive in the right ways. And by the time May ends, do not be surprised if you want more from life than the old setup was ever capable of giving you. That is not restlessness. That is growth. Taurus rising. May begins across from you. The full moon in Scorpio on May 1st lands in your 7th house, so the month opens through relationships, clients, agreements, attraction, conflict, and the emotional weather inside your one-to-one life. Something there becomes impossible to half handle. A partner may want clarity. A client situation may sharpen. A bond that has been carrying more intensity than either person wanted to name may finally stop pretending to be simple. The Scorpio full moon is exact on May 1st, and it brings culmination, exposure, and emotional concentration to that area of your chart. So right away, another person matters. That is the first thing to understand about this month for Taurus rising. May does not begin with you moving quietly at your own pace. It begins with response, reflection, reaction, a mirror. Somebody else's needs, expectations, pressure, desire, inconsistency, honesty, or demands can suddenly become the thing setting the tone. And that can be useful, because sometimes the 7th house reveals the truth through contrast. You see where you stand by noticing what the dynamic asks of you. You see what is working by noticing what immediately feels balanced and what immediately feels too heavy. You see what has changed inside you by noticing which relational pattern now feels stale, exhausting, or harder to tolerate than it did before. For some Taurus rising people, this will be romantic. A relationship reaches a turning point. A truth about desire becomes harder to ignore. An emotional current that has been running underneath the connection becomes visible enough that it now needs language, not intuition. For others, this is about business, contracts, collaboration, or the simple fact that another person is no longer letting the situation stay vague. Either way, the first days of May have weight. There is intensity here, but there is also information. Who wants more? Who is uncertain? Who keeps asking for reassurance? Who has been carrying too much? Who is withholding? Who is trying to control the terms? Who is more committed to the appearance of peace than to actual honesty? That is what the full moon is showing you. And because Scorpio is involved, the issue is usually not just surface behavior. It is motive, attachment, power, trust, emotional leverage. The part nobody likes to describe directly, but everybody feels. Then the month starts returning you to yourself. Mercury enters Taurus on May 2nd, shifting the mental tone into your 1st house. That matters immediately. After a beginning that could easily feel intense, loaded, or emotionally crowded by another person's presence, Mercury in your sign helps you hear your own thinking again. Your thoughts get steadier. Your speech gets clearer. Your reactions get simpler. The static lowers. That ingress happens in the first days of the month, and it begins moving the attention away from the drama of the exchange and back toward your own position inside it. This is where May starts getting good for you, because Taurus does not need noise to be strong. You do better when things become legible, when you can feel your footing, when your own perspective stops being drowned out by somebody else's intensity. Mercury in Taurus helps with exactly that. Now you can ask better questions. What do I actually want here? What am I willing to keep carrying? What have I outgrown? What have I been tolerating because it seemed easier than changing it? And what feels solid enough to keep building with? Then the Taurus new moon arrives on May 16th, and that is your real reset point. The new moon in Taurus marks the beginning of a new cycle in your first house: body, confidence, identity, pace, direction, image, energy, and the version of you that now has to come forward. It is exact on May 16th, and for Taurus rising, this is one of the most important personal resets of the month. This is where the script changes. The month started by showing you the state of the relationship field around you. The middle of the month starts asking what you are doing with that information. Not what the other person wants. Not what the old arrangement was. Not what would keep things smooth for everybody else. You. That is why this new moon is so important. A first house new moon is personal in the clearest possible way. It can bring a new presentation of self, a stronger body focus, a more direct attitude, a different standard around visibility, a moment where you stop waiting to feel completely ready and simply decide that the old version of you is no longer the one running the story. For some Taurus rising people, this shows up physically. A change in style, a change in appearance, a more intentional relationship with your body, your health, your posture, your presence. For others, it is psychological. Less hesitation, less apologizing, less willingness to shrink yourself to stabilize a room that is unstable for reasons that have nothing to do with you. And for some of you, it is quieter but deeper than either of those. It is the moment you realize your life cannot keep being organized around somebody else's emotional weather. That is a real turning point. The middle of May gives you a chance to come back into your own shape. Not in a rushed way, not in a performative way, in a Taurus way. Gradually, clearly, and with much better instincts around what feels right in your body and what does not. Then late May changes speed. Mercury enters Gemini on May 17th. Mars enters Taurus on May 18th. Venus enters Cancer on May 18th. Gemini season begins on May 20th. So the second half of the month begins splitting your attention between two things at once: your own momentum and your practical life. Mercury moving into Gemini activates your second house of money, spending, earnings, possessions, and value. Mars entering Taurus energizes your first house. Venus entering Cancer softens your third house of communication. And the Sun entering Gemini on May 20th keeps the money and value storyline active. This is where the month starts picking up. And with Mars entering your sign on the 18th, you feel it. More fire, more urgency, more appetite, more edge, more willingness to move something that has been too slow, more impatience with anything that feels like drag. Mars in Taurus is different from Mars in Aries. It is not fast in the same way. It is not twitchy. It is not looking for motion just for the sake of motion. But once it decides something matters, it becomes very difficult to redirect. It brings endurance, insistence, and a stronger refusal to be pushed off your own ground. That can be excellent for you. If the beginning of May showed relationship pressure and the middle rebuilt your sense of self, Mars in Taurus is the part that gives you backbone. It gives force to your identity. It gives traction to your decisions. It makes you harder to rush, harder to manipulate, and much less interested in explaining yourself to people who have already had enough chances to understand. It can also make you a little more confrontational than usual, not always outwardly. Sometimes it shows up as a very simple internal sentence. No, actually, I'm done with that. And once Taurus arrives at that sentence, the rest tends to follow. At the same time, Mercury in Gemini and Gemini season start bringing much more attention to your second house, so practical matters become louder. Money conversations, budgeting, pricing, earnings, spending choices, what your effort is producing, what your time is worth, what needs to be protected. This is useful because after such a relationship-heavy opening, late May begins steering the story towards something more measurable. That shift matters Because one of the smartest things Taurus rising can do this month is refuse to stay trapped in pure relationship intensity. The chart is not asking you to spend all of May psychoanalyzing the other person. It is asking you to become more grounded in yourself, then more serious about your value. What is your energy worth? What is your labor worth? What is your presence worth? What is your peace worth? And how much of your life are you still giving away too cheaply just because the habit is familiar? That is the late May correction. And Venus entering Cancer helps beautifully here. Because while Mars gives you force, Venus gives you tone. In Cancer, it softens your communication, warms your speech, and makes it easier to say what you mean in a way that lands. That ingress can support better conversations, sweeter timing, more emotional intelligence in language, and a little more grace in situations that would otherwise become too rigid or defensive. That is important, because the month does not need you to become cold. It needs you to become clearer. There is a difference. And then May ends by taking you deeper again. The full moon in Sagittarius on May 31st lands in your 8th house. So after beginning with relationship truth in the 7th, moving through a deeply personal reset in the 1st, and building momentum around money and worth in the 2nd, the month closes by returning to the deeper layer. Shared resources, trust, debt, support, intimacy, dependence, obligation, and the emotional consequences of any exchange that is not actually equal. The Sagittarius full moon on May 31st marks that culmination point. This ending makes sense, because by then, you are not the same version of yourself that existed on May 1st. You have had the relationship mirror. You have had the personal reset. You have had Mars move into your sign. You have had the money house activated. So when the full moon in Sagittarius arrives at the end of the month, it can show you the larger truth underneath all of it. What is this connection costing me? What is this arrangement giving me? What am I tied to emotionally or financially? What am I ready to handle differently now? And which exchanges in my life are truly mutual versus merely familiar? Sagittarius adds honesty and perspective. It wants the wider truth, not the clever excuse. By the end of May, you may not want to keep carrying anything that requires you to betray your own stability in order to maintain it. That is not selfish. That is maturity. So May has a very clear architecture for Taurus rising. It opens through another person. It returns you to yourself. It gives you a personal reset. It puts force back into your body and your decisions. It makes value and practical reality impossible to ignore. And then it closes by revealing the deeper terms underneath everything you have been renegotiating. For Taurus rising, the key is simple. Do not get lost in somebody else's intensity at the start of the month. Use the middle of May to come back into your own shape, your own pace, and your own authority. And once Mars enters your sign, trust becomes obvious. You are not here to keep smoothing over what your body, your instincts, and your standards have already outgrown. Gemini rising. May begins with something you cannot see, but you can feel. The full moon in Scorpio on May 1st lands in your 6th house. So the month opens through work, routine, health, time, habits, and the daily structure that quietly runs your life whether you pay attention to it or not. This is not a dramatic, attention-grabbing part of the chart. But when it gets activated like this, it becomes very clear, very quickly, whether your system is actually supporting you or slowly draining you. And that is what the beginning of May shows you. Something in your daily life reaches a point where it stops being manageable in the background. A workload may feel heavier than it should. A routine may stop working the way it used to. A habit may show its consequences. A health signal may become harder to ignore. Or you may simply realize that your time is being used in a way that does not match the life you are trying to build. This is not about perfection. It is about sustainability. The 6th house is where things either function quietly or quietly break down. And the Scorpio full moon does not gently suggest adjustments. It shows you the weak point directly. For some Gemini rising people, this is about work itself. Too much responsibility, not enough support, unclear expectations, or a system that keeps asking more than it gives back. For others, it is more personal. Sleep, stress, diet, nervous system, burnout, or the subtle accumulation of habits that looked harmless, but are now clearly costing something. And for many of you, it is both. Because the truth is, your daily life and your internal state are not separate. The beginning of May connects them. It shows you where your energy is being spent in ways that are not sustainable, and it does not let you pretend you will figure it out later. Then the tone shifts. Mercury enters Taurus on May 2nd, and suddenly the month moves inward. Your 12th house becomes more active, which means your thinking becomes quieter, deeper, more reflective, and less interested in constant input. You may feel less like talking everything out and more like stepping back and observing. That is not a problem. That is exactly what you need. Because after the full moon shows you what is off, the next step is not immediate action. It is understanding what is actually draining you, what you have been tolerating out of habit, what needs to end, what needs to be simplified, what needs space. The middle of May is not loud, but it is important. The Taurus new moon on the 16th lands in that same 12th house, and this is your reset point, but it does not look like a typical beginning. It is quiet, private, internal. This is where something starts to close. An old pattern begins to lose its grip. A habit starts to fade. A hidden stress begins to release. A situation that has been lingering in the background starts moving toward an ending. This is not the kind of change that needs an announcement. It is the kind that happens because you finally recognize that your energy is not unlimited, and you cannot keep spending it the same way. For some Gemini rising people, this is about rest. Real rest, not distracted recovery. For others, it is about stepping back from something draining without needing to explain it to everyone. For others, it is about finally admitting that a certain pattern, person, or obligation has been costing more than it is worth. And that realization alone starts shifting things. This part of the month may feel slower than you are used to, but it is not wasted time. It is preparation, because everything changes after the 17th. Mercury enters Gemini on May 17th, and just like that, you are back. Your voice returns, your clarity returns, your curiosity returns, your ability to think, speak, decide, and move forward comes back online in a much more visible way. This is your planet. When Mercury is in your sign, things start making sense again. Then Mars enters Taurus on the 18th, Venus enters Cancer the same day, and Gemini season begins on the 20th. So the second half of May does not just wake you up. It brings you forward. Your first house becomes active, and that means you are no longer processing quietly behind the scenes. You are in it, visible, engaged, moving, responding, initiating. People notice you more. You notice yourself more. And there is a distinct shift from internal processing to external momentum. But here is the important part. Mars is still in your 12th house. So while you are more visible, more articulate, and more active, there is still something happening underneath the surface. Something you are still working through privately. Something that still requires boundaries, rest, or protection. This is why the second half of May is not just about speed. It is about balance. You can move forward, but you cannot ignore what you learned in the first half of the month. If the beginning showed you where your energy was leaking, and the middle helped you understand why, then the second half is where you act differently. You choose better. You say no faster. You stop overcommitting. You simplify your schedule. You protect your time. You become more selective with your attention. And that is where the real progress happens. Because Gemini energy can easily say yes to everything. But this month is not asking you to do more. It is asking you to do what actually matters. Venus entering Cancer supports you here by bringing softness into your second house of money and value. It helps you feel what is worth your time, not just logically, but emotionally. What feels good to invest in? What feels draining? What feels aligned? What feels like too much? That emotional clarity becomes a very useful filter. Then the month ends with a Sagittarius full moon on May 31st, landing in your 7th house. And now, relationships come into full focus. After everything you have processed internally and adjusted practically, the question becomes very clear. Who fits this version of you? A partner may show you something directly. A client dynamic may reach a decision point. An agreement may become clearer. Or you may simply see, very plainly, which connections feel easy and which ones feel like work. This full moon does not create the situation. It reveals it. Because by the end of May, you are not the same person who started the month. You have seen where your energy was being drained, stepped back and understood it, quietly released what was not working, returned to yourself with more clarity, and started moving forward with better boundaries. So when the relationship picture comes into focus at the end of the month, you are seeing it from a stronger position, not from confusion, not from exhaustion, from awareness. And that changes everything. For Gemini rising, the key is simple. Take the beginning of the month seriously, even if it feels quiet or inconvenient. That is where the real information is. Use the middle to reset behind the scenes instead of rushing back into motion too quickly. And when your energy returns, do not waste it by repeating the same patterns that drained you in the first place. You are not here to be busy. You are here to be effective. Cancer rising. May begins with the heart wide open. The full moon in Scorpio on May 1st lands in your 5th house, so the month opens through romance, creativity, pleasure, children, attention, desire, and the part of life that is supposed to feel alive. That is where the first light falls. Not on work, not on duty, not on the practical mess, on the place where joy either exists or very clearly does not. And that is useful, because the 5th house does not lie well. You can fake your way through a schedule. You can maintain a role. You can keep a system going long after it stops feeling good. But when this part of the chart gets activated, the truth gets personal very fast. What still has heat in it? What has gone flat? What you want more of? What you are pretending not to want? What is alive? And what is only being maintained out of habit? That is what the beginning of May starts revealing. For some Cancer rising people, this will show up through romance. A connection deepens, intensifies, or becomes harder to ignore. Attraction gets stronger. A complicated emotional situation becomes more obvious. A truth about desire asks to be named instead of managed quietly. For others, this is creative. A project may suddenly matter more. An idea may become emotionally charged. You may realize that one part of your life wants expression, not control. And for some of you, this full moon lands through children, visibility, performance, or the simple realization that your life has become too functional and not nearly alive enough. That matters, because the beginning of May is not just showing you what is happening. It is showing you what still has a pulse. And Scorpio does not do mild. So whatever comes up here tends to have depth in it. The feeling is not casual. The attraction is not casual. The frustration is not casual. The longing is not casual. This is the kind of opening that shows you where your emotional energy is already invested, whether or not you have been honest about that yet. Then the month changes tone. Mercury enters Taurus on May 2nd, and your attention starts moving toward the future. Friends, groups, collaborations, networks, support systems, and long-range plans begin to matter more. So after the month starts in the heat of the moment, the middle of May asks a very different question. Where is this going? Not what feels intense right now. Not what is exciting today. Not what is emotionally loud. Where is this leading? That shift is important for you, because Cancer can feel deeply and clearly, but that does not always mean the next move is obvious. Taurus helps with that. It slows things down enough for you to get perspective. It asks who is really with you, what kind of future you are building, which people support your next chapter, and which ones only belong to your old emotional patterning. This is where the month becomes more strategic. You are no longer only inside the feeling. You are looking at the wider shape around it. The Taurus new moon on the 16th is your reset point in the 11th house. That means something new can begin around friendship, audience, collaboration, community, social support, or a long-term goal that is ready to become more concrete. A new alliance can form. A new project can begin. A different kind of future can start feeling more real than the one you were working with before. This is especially useful if the opening of May brings up a lot emotionally, because the new moon gives you room. It does not cancel the feeling. It gives it context. It reminds you that your life is larger than one emotional moment, one attraction, one uncertainty, one romantic question, or one creative surge. The middle of the month helps you place the feeling inside a wider story. And for Cancer rising, that is often exactly what is needed. Not less feeling, better perspective. Then the tempo changes again. Mercury enters Gemini on May 17th. Mars enters Taurus on May 18th. Venus enters Cancer on the same day. Gemini season begins on May 20th. That is a real shift. By late May, part of your attention starts moving inward. Your 12th house becomes more active, which means rest, intuition, endings, dreams, quiet processing, private decisions, and the things happening underneath the visible story all become more important. So even if the middle of the month looks social or future-oriented from the outside, the second half begins pulling you towards something more internal. You may need more space, more silence, more sleep, more time away from noise, more distance from people who drain you, more contact with your own inner signal before you keep moving outward. This is not a step backward. It is a recalibration. And it matters because Mars enters Taurus on the 18th, which puts more energy into your 11th house at the same time. So there are really two stories running at once by late May. One part of you is trying to move something forward through friends, plans, collaboration, and the wider future. Another part of you is realizing you cannot just keep pouring energy outward without checking what is happening underneath. That tension is real, and it is useful, because it stops you from building a future that looks good from a distance, but leaves no room for your actual emotional life. Venus entering Cancer on May 18th helps a lot here. It brings softness back to you, charm, ease, magnetism, a stronger connection to your own body and instincts, a reminder that you do not need to become harder in order to become clearer. This can make you more attractive, yes, but more importantly, it can make you more comfortable in your own skin. That matters, especially in a month that begins with strong feeling and then asks for both perspective and retreat. Venus in your sign helps you come back to yourself without force. And by the end of May, the month brings the question back down to earth. The full moon in Sagittarius on the 31st lands in your 6th house. So after a beginning full of feeling, desire, and emotional truth, and a middle focused on the wider future, and a second half that turns partly inward, the month ends by asking something very practical. How are you living? What is your daily life doing to you? What is your routine supporting? What is your schedule costing? What habits are helping? What habits are quietly ruining the quality of everything else? This is a very good ending, even if it is not the glamorous one, because the 6th house is where real life happens. And by the time this full moon arrives, you may understand something important. It is not enough to know what you feel. It is not enough to know what you want. It is not enough to know what future you are trying to build. Your daily life has to match it. Your body has to be able to hold it. Your time has to support it. Your habits have to stop fighting it. That is the wisdom in the ending of May for Cancer rising. The month starts by showing you what feels alive. Then it asks where that feeling belongs in the larger future. Then it pulls some of your attention inward so you can hear yourself clearly again. And then it ends by asking whether your daily system is actually capable of supporting the life your heart is pointing toward. That is a strong arc, and it is also a very honest one. Because for Cancer rising, the real mistake in May would be assuming that emotion alone is enough. It is not. The heart is the opening. It is not the whole answer. The middle of the month gives you perspective. The second half gives you self-connection. The ending gives you practicality. Taken together, that is what makes this month useful. For Cancer rising, the key is simple. Pay attention to what the heart shows you at the beginning of the month. Do not confuse intensity with direction. Let the middle of May show you the wider future around what you feel. And by the end of the month, be honest about whether your daily life is helping your deeper desires grow or quietly making them harder to live. Leo rising. May begins at home. The full moon in Scorpio on May 1st lands in your 4th house. So the month opens through family, home, property, roots, emotional foundations, and the private part of life that exists underneath everything public. That is where the pressure gathers first. not in your career, not in your social world, in the place that is supposed to hold you when everything else gets loud. And that matters, because the fourth house is not theatrical. It does not usually announce itself dramatically unless something there really needs attention. It rules what is underneath the performance, your inner stability, your living environment, the emotional climate in the home, family patterns that still shape your choices, even when you are busy pretending they do not. When this part of the chart lights up, it becomes very obvious very quickly whether the foundation is solid or whether it has simply been quiet enough to avoid dealing with. That is what the opening of May starts showing you. A family matter may intensify. A living situation may ask for a decision. A private tension may become harder to keep contained. A question about where you belong, who you live with, or what peace actually requires may stop waiting politely in the background. This is not necessarily chaos, but it is clarity. For some Leo rising people, this full moon lands through literal home issues. A move, a property matter, a roommate situation, a family responsibility, a decision about where your energy is being spent when you are off the clock. For others, it is more emotional than physical. Old family patterns, buried feelings, resentment that has been sitting under the surface, a deeper awareness that the private life is carrying more weight than the visible life is admitting. And because Scorpio is involved, the feeling runs deeper than it first appears. This is not just about decor or logistics. It is about what feels safe, what feels draining, what feels unresolved, what still has emotional power over you, what part of your foundation is strong, and what part of it is asking for repair. That is the real beginning of May for Leo rising. The month starts underneath the story, not on the stage. Then the focus begins moving upward. Mercury enters Taurus on May 2nd, and your 10th house becomes more active. Career, reputation, public role, visibility, authority, and direction in the world start occupying more of your attention. So after the month opens in private, the middle of May begins asking what is happening in public. That shift is important because it reminds you that the emotional reality at home is not separate from the public role you are trying to carry. One affects the other. A shaky foundation eventually shows up in the performance. A peaceful foundation makes everything easier to hold. Taurus in your 10th house is practical, steady, and serious. It wants to know what you are building, what you are known for, what position you are stepping into, and whether your outer life has enough structure to support your ambition. This is where May becomes more visible. Meetings matter more. Career decisions matter more. Responsibility becomes louder. The question of direction starts getting harder to postpone. And if the beginning of the month showed you something unstable or emotionally expensive in private life, the middle now shows you why it matters. Because the more public your role becomes, the more you need a base that can actually support it. The Taurus new moon on the 16th is your reset point in the 10th house. That is significant. A 10th house new moon can bring a new professional chapter, a new project, a new title, a new standard, a new level of seriousness, or a very clear change in how you want to be seen. Even if nothing changes overnight on paper, something changes in your relationship to your public life. You start taking a different path seriously. For some Leo rising people, this is the moment you realize the current role is too small. For others, it is the point where a new responsibility becomes real. For others, it is less about external change and more about internal certainty. You know what you are building now. You know what deserves your energy. You know where you are done drifting. That clarity matters, because Leo can survive a surprising amount of pressure when there is purpose behind it. What drains you is not hard work. It is carrying hard work in a direction that no longer feels meaningful. The middle of May begins correcting that. It says, if you're going to give this much energy, let it be toward something real. Let it be toward a future you respect. Let it be toward a role that actually fits. Then everything changes speed. Mercury enters Gemini on May 17th. Mars enters Taurus on May 18th. Venus enters Cancer that same day. Gemini season begins on May 20th. Now the month gets busier and it also gets more social. Your 11th house becomes active, which means friends, groups, allies, networks, audience, community, and long-term plans start moving faster. Conversations multiply. Invitations appear. New people may enter the picture. Existing connections may suddenly become more useful. Support matters. Strategy matters. Who is around your future starts becoming just as important as what you are trying to build. This is especially helpful after a career-focused new moon. Because once the public direction begins shifting, you immediately start seeing which people belong in the next chapter and which ones do not. And that matters more than you might think. Not every friend is a future person. Not every audience is your audience. Not every group deserves access to your energy. Late may help sort that out. Mercury in Gemini makes your social world livelier, quicker, more conversational, and more mentally active. Gemini season keeps that movement going. There can be more talking, more planning, more collaboration, more messaging, more organizing around where things are heading. At the same time, Mars enters Taurus on the 18th, and that puts serious force into your 10th house. This is a major shift. Now, the career story is not just thoughtful or slowly forming. It is active. You may feel more driven, more ambitious, less tolerant of delay, more aware of where your effort is being wasted, much less willing to stay passive in situations that clearly need movement. Mars in Taurus is not reckless, but it is determined. It does not rush in a scattered way. It pushes with weight. It makes you harder to distract and harder to persuade once you know what matters. That can be excellent for Leo rising. The middle of the month gives you a direction. Mars gives you traction. It adds muscle to the public story. It makes you more willing to take responsibility, claim space, act decisively, and stop pretending that a vague path is good enough. The only caution here is that Mars can also make public pressure feel heavier. A boss may become more demanding. A timeline may feel tighter. A goal may start requiring more than you first hoped. That is not necessarily bad. It just means the month becomes more real after the 18th. And Venus entering Cancer helps soften what is happening underneath all this. That ingress moves into your 12th house, which brings a quieter influence to the background of the month. More intuition, more softness in private life, more need for solitude, reflection, emotional protection, and rest away from the performance. This is useful because without it, May could become all output and no recovery. Venus in Cancer reminds you that retreat is not weakness. Privacy is not avoidance. Sometimes the most intelligent thing you can do is step back from the noise and let your nervous system catch up with the life you are building. Then the month ends by bringing the heart back in. The full moon in Sagittarius on May 31st lands in your 5th house. So after a beginning rooted in home and emotional foundations, a middle focused on career and public direction, and a second half alive with social movement and strategic connections, the month closes through joy, creativity, romance, visibility, pleasure, and the part of you that needs more than duty. That ending matters because it reminds you what the work is for. A Sagittarius full moon in the 5th can bring a romantic truth, a creative release, a visibility moment, a child-related culmination, or simply a very clear realization that you need more life in your life. More spontaneity, more expression, more room to be fully yourself instead of only useful, responsible, or impressive. And that is a very healthy correction, because Leo can absolutely become all function when the stakes are high. You can carry the role, manage the pressure, push through the expectation, and keep the show going. But by the end of May, the chart asks something sharper. Where is the fire? Where is the pleasure? Where is the desire? Where is the part of this life that actually feels like yours? That is the emotional intelligence in this ending. The month begins by showing you what is happening at the root. Then it builds upward into career, public movement, and the structure of your outer life. Then it expands through people, networks, and future direction. And finally, it circles back to the most human question of all. Does any of this still feel alive? That is why May has such a strong shape for Leo rising. It starts below the surface. It moves into the visible world. It gains momentum around what you are building. And it ends by reminding you that success without aliveness is not actually the goal. For Leo rising, the key is simple. Do not ignore the private truth at the beginning of the month, just because the career story gets louder later. Use the middle of May to get serious about direction, not just activity. Let the second half show you who actually belongs around your future. And when the month ends, listen carefully to what brings the fire back. That is not a distraction from the work. That is the reason the work needs to exist at all. Virgo rising. May begins with information, movement, and something that can no longer stay half said. The full moon in Scorpio on May 1st lands in your third house, so the month opens through conversation, paperwork, logistics, short trips, siblings, local movement, messages, decisions, and the general state of your mental traffic. That may not sound dramatic at first, but when this part of the chart lights up, it becomes obvious very quickly whether your mind is carrying what it should be carrying, or far more than it needs to. And that is the first thing May shows you. Something reaches a point of clarity. A conversation may finally happen. A decision may stop waiting. News may arrive. A document may need a response. A piece of information you have been circling around may suddenly become impossible to ignore. This is the kind of beginning that makes the noise sort itself. Not all at once, but enough that you can tell which message matters, which issue is real, and which mental clutter has been eating up attention without actually deserving it. That is useful, because Virgo can handle a lot of details, but that does not mean every detail deserves equal importance. And when the third house gets activated by a Scorpio full moon, the signal tends to cut through the static. What is urgent becomes obvious. What is emotionally loaded becomes harder to bypass. What has been hovering in the background as an unfinished thought, an unsent message, an unresolved conversation, or a practical question waiting for an answer starts demanding one. For some Virgo rising people, this will land through a sibling or family adjacent dynamic. For others, it is about transport, technology, scheduling, writing, contracts, errands, or the general reality that too many small things have started carrying too much emotional weight. And because Scorpio is involved, the issue is rarely just practical. There is often a deeper layer. What are you not saying? What have you been trying to manage through control instead of honesty? What conversation has more emotional charge in it than you first admitted? What truth keeps coming back because it clearly wants a response? That is the atmosphere at the start of May. The mind gets sharper. The signal gets stronger. And whatever has been quietly hanging in the air starts feeling much less optional. Then the month lifts your eyes. Mercury enters Taurus on May 2nd, and your ninth house becomes more active. That changes the tone almost immediately. After a beginning full of details, conversations, and immediate decisions, the middle of May starts opening the larger picture. Travel, study, teaching, legal matters, publishing, belief, perspective, and the broader direction of your life. This is an excellent shift for you, because once the opening of the month shows you what has been mentally crowded, Taurus helps widen the frame. You stop looking only at the next message, the next errand, the next task, the next reply. You start asking a better question. Where is all of this going? That matters, because Virgo is often very capable of solving the problem right in front of you. What gets lost sometimes is the larger context. Are you solving the right problem? Are you organizing around the right future? Are you giving your intelligence to something that is actually taking you somewhere, or just keeping you occupied? The middle of May starts helping with that. It steadies the mind. It slows down the pace enough for perspective to return. And it begins pulling your attention toward what is farther away, but more important. The Taurus new moon on the 16th is your reset point in the ninth house. That is where the month opens. Not outward in a chaotic way, outward in a meaningful way. A new direction can begin here. A new course of study, a travel plan, a publishing or teaching path, a legal or administrative process that starts becoming more real, a stronger commitment to a future that feels larger than the one you have been settling for. This is one of those new moons that can look simple from the outside, but feel very significant internally. It changes your relationship to possibility. It reminds you that life is not only the immediate problem. There is a wider road. There is a bigger plan. There is a future perspective that makes the current confusion much easier to organize. And for Virgo rising, that can feel like relief. Not because everything is solved, because finally it is going somewhere. The middle of May gives you orientation, and orientation is powerful. Once you know what direction matters, the smaller decisions become much easier to sort. You stop giving equal emotional weight to everything. You stop treating every message like destiny. You stop assuming the immediate pressure is the whole story. Then late May speeds the whole thing up. Mercury enters Gemini on May 17th. Mars enters Taurus on May 18th. Venus enters Cancer the same day. Gemini season begins on May 20th. That is a real shift. By the second half of the month, your 10th house becomes highly active. Career, visibility, authority, public role, ambition, and responsibility come forward fast. So the wider vision that starts forming in the middle of May does not stay abstract for long. Very quickly, it starts asking for a real-world expression. What are you building? What are you known for? What are you stepping into? What are you saying yes to publicly? What deserves your effort, your discipline, and your name attached to it? This is where the month gets more visible. There may be more attention on your work, more demand around career matters, more conversations about next steps, more awareness that a public role is changing or needs to. Mercury in Gemini makes the pace faster. Information moves quickly. Decisions may come faster than expected. Conversations with authority figures, clients, bosses, or the outside world can become more central. And because Gemini is your 10th house, this late May period can feel mentally busy. Not scattered if you handle it well, but definitely active. You may be answering more, planning more, thinking on your feet more, explaining more, managing more visible movement around where your life is headed. At the same time, Mars enters Taurus on the 18th, energizing your 9th house. That matters a great deal, because the larger vision now gets force behind it. Something you were only considering may become something you are ready to act on. Travel, legal matters, education, publishing, teaching, content, applications, relocation possibilities, or a larger strategic decision can start moving with more momentum. Mars in Taurus does not rush, but it commits. It gives the middle of the month more weight. It makes the long-range plan feel less theoretical and more real. This is helpful because Virgo can sometimes stay in research mode longer than necessary. Mars in Taurus says, enough thinking, start building the road. Not recklessly, not impulsively, deliberately, but with movement. And Venus entering Cancer on the 18th softens the social picture around all of this. Your 11th house becomes more supportive. Friends, community, audience, collaborators, and the people around your future may become more helpful, more emotionally intelligent, or simply easier to connect with. That is useful because once the month starts getting professionally active, the right support matters. You are not meant to build everything alone. And late May may remind you of that in very practical ways. A friend may become more important. A group may become more relevant. A conversation may reveal a better ally. A future plan may start looking more possible because the right people are finally visible. Then the month ends by bringing the story home. The full moon in Sagittarius on May 31st lands in your 4th house. So after a beginning full of messages, decisions, and mental traffic, a middle that opens the horizon, and a second half that pushes career and public movement to the front, May closes through home, family, emotional foundation, property, and private life. That ending makes sense, because by then, the larger direction is clearer. The public story is more active, the momentum is real, and the next honest question becomes, can your foundation hold it? What is happening at home? What is happening underneath the role? What part of your private life needs attention now that the public life is getting louder? What emotional truth has to be faced if the future is really going to move the way you want it to? A Sagittarius full moon in the 4th can bring a family realization, a domestic turning point, a living situation decision, a need for more honesty at home, or simply the clear understanding that your private world has to match the life you are trying to build. That is important because Virgo can absolutely carry a lot publicly while quietly ignoring what is not working underneath. But the end of May does not let that continue without making the imbalance visible. If the middle of the month opens the road and the second half gets the career story moving, the full moon on the 31st asks whether your roots are strong enough to support the expansion. That is not a setback. It is the final piece. And actually, it makes the whole month much stronger. May starts in the mind. It opens through information, decisions, messages, and the practical details that need sorting. Then it lifts into perspective, distance, and future direction. Then it accelerates around career, recognition, and public movement. And finally, it asks whether your private life, your emotional base, and your home reality are built well enough to carry what is coming next. That is a very coherent arc. And for Virgo rising, it is a very useful one. Because this month does not just hand you more tasks. It helps you understand which ones matter. It does not just create movement. It gives the movement direction. And it does not just push you outward. It reminds you that anything worth building publicly also needs a private structure strong enough to support it. For Virgo rising, the key is simple. Do not let the small noise at the beginning of the month convince you that the month is only about details. Use the middle of May to reconnect with the bigger path. Let the second half show you what wants to become real in the outer world. And when the month ends, be honest about what your home life, your foundation, and your emotional world need in order for the larger future to actually work. Libra rising. May begins with a reality check around value. The full moon in Scorpio on May 1st lands in your second house, so the month opens through money, self-worth, spending, income, possessions, and the very practical question of what is actually supporting your life. That is where the first pressure gathers. Not in relationships yet. Not in the larger future. In the part of the chart that deals with resources, stability, and the exchange between what you give and what you receive. And that is useful, because the second house does not care how elegant the explanation is if the numbers, the effort, or the energy exchange are not working. When this part of the chart gets activated by a Scorpio full moon, something becomes hard to ignore. A financial issue may become more obvious. A spending pattern may suddenly look more expensive than it did before. An earning situation may show its limits, or deeper than that. You may realize you have been accepting less than something is worth because changing the terms felt more disruptive than tolerating the imbalance. That is often how this begins, not as one dramatic event, as a quiet but unmistakable awareness that something is costing too much. For some Libra rising people, this is literal money. Pricing, income, fees, bills, spending habits, savings, debt pressure, or the simple realization that a practical arrangement has to change. For others, it is value in the wider sense. Time, energy, attention, emotional labor. The part of life where you may have been generous by reflex, diplomatic by habit, or too willing to smooth over what should have been renegotiated much earlier. And Scorpio makes it sharper. This is not a mild nudge. It shows you where the exchange has become loaded. What are you giving? What are you getting back? What has become too expensive? What have you been underestimating? What are you tolerating because it keeps the peace? And where does peace stop being peace when it quietly erodes your value? That is the opening of May for Libra rising, a moment where reality gets specific. And that matters because Libra often sees multiple sides of a situation very clearly. You understand nuance. You can see why people do what they do. You can often explain the emotional and social context better than anyone else in the room. But the beginning of May asks for something more concrete than understanding. It asks whether the terms are fair. And if they are not, it wants you to notice that before you keep compensating for it with grace. Then the month moves deeper. Mercury enters Taurus on May 2nd, and your 8th house becomes more active. That changes the tone immediately. The question is no longer only about what is yours. It becomes about what is shared. Shared money, debt, taxes, support, trust, intimacy, emotional entanglement, power dynamics, the consequences of agreements that tie your life to somebody else's decisions, behavior, or resources. This is where the month gets serious. Because if the full moon in the second shows you a problem around value, Taurus in the eighth starts tracing where that problem is linked to a deeper exchange. And often, that is where the real answer is. What has been promised? What is owed? What is unclear? What you are carrying for someone else? What you are emotionally tied to because of obligation, history, guilt, desire, or dependence. This is not the light part of the chart, but it is one of the most revealing. And for Libra rising, it can be extremely useful. Because sometimes the reason a value problem has not been solved is that it is not only a second house issue. It is attached to an eighth house dynamic, a shared responsibility, a trust issue, a financial entanglement, a dependency, a promise, a fear of what changes if the terms become fully honest. The middle of May asks you to look there. Not dramatically, not destructively, carefully. The Taurus new moon on the 16th is your reset point in the eighth house. That means something can begin again on new terms. A financial restructuring, a cleaner agreement, a more honest conversation about trust, a different plan around debt, support, shared resources, or emotional boundaries. A new standard around what you will and will not carry for other people. This new moon is not about surface charm. It is about substance. It asks whether the deeper exchange can become steadier, clearer, and more workable. It may not feel glamorous, but it is powerful because it helps you stop living inside vague emotional or financial arrangements that consume energy without offering clarity. For some Libra rising people, this will feel like relief. For others, it will feel like exposure. Often it is both, because eighth house resets do not usually happen by staying comfortable. They happen by becoming honest. And the honesty here is not cruel. It is practical. If something is shared, define it. If something is owed, understand it. If something is draining you, stop dressing it up. If trust is real, let it become stronger. If it is not, stop pretending the issue is only timing. That is the work of the middle of May. It helps you stop floating around the real issue. Then late May opens the windows. Mercury enters Gemini on May 17th. Mars enters Taurus on May 18th. Venus enters Cancer the same day. Gemini season begins on May 20th. Now the month gets air in it. Your ninth house becomes active, which means travel, teaching, study, publishing, legal matters, worldview, perspective, and wider possibilities begin pulling your attention forward. After a beginning focused on money and a middle focused on deeper entanglements, late May starts giving you distance. That is good. Very good. Because once the month has taken you through value and then deeper exchange, the mind needs room to breathe. Gemini does that. It widens the horizon. It asks larger questions. It reminds you that life is bigger than the immediate complication you have been wrestling with. And that can change everything. Sometimes the answer does not arrive because you think harder. Sometimes it arrives because you step back far enough to see the whole pattern. Late May supports that. You may want more movement, more options, more truth, more honesty about what the future actually requires. A road that feels larger than the one you have been negotiating inside. Mercury in Gemini helps by making the mind quicker, more curious, and more open to multiple possibilities. Gemini season keeps that pace going. A travel plan could matter. A teaching or writing opportunity could become more visible. Legal, academic, or administrative matters may start moving. Or more simply, your perspective changes, and suddenly the whole situation looks different from the wider angle. At the same time, Mars enters Taurus on the 18th, energizing your 8th house. That is significant, because while the late month tone becomes broader and mentally freer, the deeper issue has not disappeared. Mars now brings force to it. Shared money, emotional boundaries, trust, support, and deeper negotiations become more active. You may become less patient with vagueness, less willing to carry a blurred arrangement, less interested in pretending a complicated exchange will fix itself. That can be productive. Mars in Taurus is not impulsive, but it does push. It gives you the will to deal with what has been sitting underneath the surface. It can bring momentum to financial restructuring, directness to a trust issue, or a stronger refusal to keep participating in agreements that only work because you are the one compensating for their weakness. And Venus entering Cancer supports your 10th house at the same time. That is a welcome balancing factor. It can soften career matters, improve your visibility, make professional relationships more pleasant, and help public interactions land better. There can be more grace around work, more magnetism in how you are seen, or simply a better emotional tone around your role in the world. That helps, because the middle and late parts of May can feel heavy underneath. Venus in Cancer reminds you that not everything has to be a battle to become clearer. Then the month ends by bringing things back down to earth. The full moon in Sagittarius on May 31st lands in your 3rd house. So after a beginning focused on value, a middle focused on what is shared, and a second half that opens the larger horizon, May closes through communication, messages, conversations, paperwork, local movement, decisions, and something finally being said. That ending makes sense, because by then, you have felt the practical imbalance. You have traced it into the deeper exchange. You have gained more perspective. And now a message, a conversation, a decision, or a piece of information reaches the point where it can no longer stay suspended. What needs to be said? What needs to be clarified? What needs to be answered? What decision has finally become obvious? What truth is now simple enough to speak without softening it into something else? That is the release point at the end of May. And Sagittarius helps because it wants directness. It wants honesty. It wants the wider truth, not the carefully edited version that keeps everybody temporarily comfortable. That is useful for Libra rising, because by the time this full moon arrives, you may be much less interested in saying the most beautiful thing and much more interested in saying the true thing. Not to be harsh, to be clear. So May has a very coherent shape for you. It opens by showing you where value is off. Then it takes you deeper into the emotional and financial exchange underneath that imbalance. Then it gives you perspective, room, and a wider frame. And finally, it closes through communication, decision, and the moment where something gets named plainly enough to move. That is a strong month. Not because it is light, because it is useful. It asks the right questions. It reveals where the leak is. It gives you a chance to reset the deeper terms. And then it helps you say what needs to be said from a much stronger position than the one you started with. For Libra rising, the key is simple. Take the opening of the month seriously when it shows you what is no longer fair. Do not stay on the surface if the real issue is clearly buried in a deeper exchange. Use the second half of May to widen your perspective instead of shrinking into the problem. And when the month ends, say the thing that has become obvious, not the diplomatic version, the accurate one. Scorpio rising. May begins with you. The full moon in Scorpio on May 1st lands in your 1st house. So the month opens through your body, your energy, your mood, your needs, your identity, your presence, and the role you have been carrying. This is not subtle. A 1st house full moon puts a spotlight directly on you. How you feel, how you look, how you are showing up, what you are tolerating, what you're done with. And because it is in your sign, it is stronger. You feel this, not as a vague shift, as something immediate. You may feel more emotional than usual, more aware of your limits, more aware of how much you have been carrying, more aware of how your role in a situation has changed, even if the situation itself has not caught up yet. This is a turning point, not because everything outside you changes overnight, because your relationship to it does. A 1st house full moon often marks a moment where you can no longer ignore yourself, what you need, what you are done tolerating, what version of yourself you have been trying to maintain, what no longer fits. That is the opening of May. And for Scorpio rising, that matters more than anything happening around you. Because once you change your position, everything else has to respond to that. Then the focus shifts immediately to relationships. Mercury enters Taurus on May 2nd, activating your 7th house. So after the month begins with you, the middle becomes about the other person. Partners, clients, agreements, negotiations, attraction, conflict, and one-to-one dynamics move into focus. This is where the month becomes interactive. What you realized at the beginning of May now starts affecting how you relate. A partner may respond to your shift. A client may need clearer terms. A conversation may become more direct. A dynamic that relied on you playing a certain role may start adjusting or resisting. That is normal, because when you change, the relationship has to recalibrate. And that is exactly what the middle of May is doing. It is not creating random tension. It is updating the terms. The Taurus new moon on the 16th is your reset point in the 7th house. That means a new chapter begins in relationships. New partner, new client, new agreement, new boundaries, new expectations, a different tone in an existing connection. This is not abstract. This changes how you and another person meet each other. For some Scorpio rising people, this is the beginning of something new. A new connection enters. A new collaboration starts. A new contract is formed. For others, it is a reset within something that already exists. The dynamic shifts. The expectations become clearer. The terms become more grounded. And for some, it is the realization that a connection cannot continue in the same way because you are no longer the same person inside it. That is the deeper truth here. The new moon is not just about the relationship. It is about your new position inside it. You are not negotiating from the same place you were at the beginning of the month. And that changes everything. Then late May deepens the story. Mercury enters Gemini on May 17th. Mars enters Taurus on May 18th. Venus enters Cancer the same day. Gemini season begins on May 20th. Now the month moves into your 8th house. Trust, shared money, debt, taxes, support, intimacy, emotional exposure, power dynamics, consequences. So the relationship story that began shifting in the middle of May does not stay surface level. It goes deeper, much deeper. This is where you start seeing what is actually underneath the connection. What is shared? What is expected? What is assumed? What is being carried by you versus by them? What is balanced? What is not? And because Gemini is involved, this may come through conversation. More direct questions, more clarity, more honesty, more willingness to name what was previously left unsaid. This is useful because once the relationship resets, the next question is whether the foundation underneath it is strong enough to hold. And Mars entering Taurus on the 18th makes that question unavoidable. Mars activates your 7th house, which means relationships become more active, more direct, and sometimes more confrontational. Not necessarily in a negative way, but definitely in a clearer one. You may have less patience, less tolerance for vague behavior, less interest in carrying both sides of the dynamic, less willingness to stay quiet when something needs to be addressed. This can be very productive. Mars in the 7th helps you act. It helps you set boundaries. It helps you define terms. It helps you stop waiting for the other person to guess what you need. But it can also bring friction if both sides are pushing at the same time. That is the balance to manage. Directness is good. Reaction for the sake of reaction is not. At the same time, Venus enters Cancer, activating your 9th house. This brings a softer influence into the larger picture. Travel, perspective, hope, meaning, a wider emotional horizon. This helps you not get stuck in the intensity of the 8th house material. It reminds you that your life is bigger than one relationship dynamic. That matters because Scorpio rising can go very deep, very fast. And while that depth is your strength, it also helps to have perspective. Venus in Cancer gives you that. It softens the edges. It brings a sense of possibility. It reminds you that not everything needs to be solved through intensity alone. Then the month ends with a Sagittarius full moon on May 31st, landing in your 2nd house. And this brings everything back to value. That was your May 2026 predictions. If this helped you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. And if you'd like a personal consultation, feel free to contact me. I'll see you in the next video. Sagittarius rising. May begins behind the scenes. The full moon in Scorpio on May 1st lands in your 12th house, so the month opens in a place that is not loud, not obvious, and not easy to explain to other people. This is the part of the chart that deals with hidden stress, endings, private emotions, dreams, intuition, rest, and everything that has been happening underneath the surface while you have been trying to function normally on top of it. And right away, something there becomes clearer, not necessarily visible to others, but visible to you. You may feel more tired than expected, more aware of something you have been carrying quietly, more aware that a situation is draining you in a way you can no longer ignore, or more aware that something is ending, even if it has not officially ended yet. This is not a dramatic beginning, but it is an important one, because the 12th house is where things either dissolve quietly or get processed consciously. And when a full moon lands here, it tends to reveal what has been quietly building in the background, the pattern you have outgrown, the habit that is no longer sustainable, the emotional weight that has been sitting underneath everything else. For some Sagittarius rising people, this is about a person or situation that is fading out of your life. For others, it is internal, a belief, a coping mechanism, a way of dealing with pressure that no longer works the way it used to. Either way, the beginning of May asks you to pay attention to what is happening underneath the visible story. Not fix it immediately. Notice it. Because once you notice it, it starts changing. Then the month becomes practical very quickly. Mercury enters Taurus on May 2nd, and your 6th house becomes active. So after a quiet internal opening, the focus shifts to work, routine, health, schedule, responsibilities, and the daily structure of your life. This is where the month becomes actionable. If the beginning of May shows you where your energy is leaking, the middle of May shows you what to do about it. What needs to be adjusted? What needs to be simplified? What needs to be removed? What needs to become more consistent? This is not about perfection. It is about functionality. The 6th house is where life either runs smoothly or quietly breaks down. And Taurus energy here wants stability. It wants a routine that actually works, a schedule that does not exhaust you, a system that supports your life instead of constantly pulling from it. The Taurus new moon on the 16th is your reset point in the 6th house. This is where something new begins in your daily life, a new routine, a new work structure, a new health focus, a new way of using your time, a decision to stop living in a way that slowly drains you. This may not look dramatic from the outside, but it is powerful, because for Sagittarius rising, the daily system is often the difference between feeling free and feeling overwhelmed. When your routine works, everything else becomes easier. When it does not, even good opportunities can start feeling heavy. The middle of May gives you a chance to fix that. Not all at once, but in a way that lasts. Then late May shifts the focus toward relationships. Mercury enters Gemini on May 17th. Mars enters Taurus on May 18th. Venus enters Cancer the same day. Gemini season begins on May 20th. Now your 7th house becomes active, and that changes the tone. After a beginning focused on internal processing and a middle focused on your own system, the second half of the month brings other people into the center of the story. Partners, clients, agreements, negotiations, one-to-one dynamics. Something here becomes more active. A partner may need more attention. A client situation may move forward. A conversation may become more direct. An agreement may need to be clarified. This is where you see how your internal and practical adjustments affect your relationships. Because once you change your routine, your boundaries, your availability, and your energy, other people feel it. And they respond. Mercury in Gemini makes this part of the month more communicative. More conversation, more discussion, more negotiation, more back and forth. This is good, because it helps you clarify where you stand. And Gemini energy is flexible enough to allow for adjustment. But Mars entering Taurus on the 18th adds another layer. It keeps your 6th house active, which means work, routine, and daily responsibilities are still demanding energy at the same time relationships are asking for attention. This is where the tension can show up. You may feel pulled between your own needs and someone else's expectations, between your schedule and their timing, between what you can realistically handle and what you feel pressured to agree to. And this is where the lesson of the month becomes very clear. You cannot say yes to everything. Not this month. Not without paying for it. Mars in the 6th gives you the strength to set better boundaries around your time. To say no when something does not fit. To adjust your schedule in a way that actually supports you. To stop overcommitting just because you can. And that is important, because the second half of May is not just about relationships. It is about how your system interacts with them. Venus entering Cancer helps soften this. It activates your 8th house, bringing a more emotional, intuitive, and supportive tone to deeper connections. Trust can grow. Intimacy can deepen. Support can feel more available. This can help balance the more practical and structured energy of Mars in your 6th. It reminds you that not everything has to be managed through effort alone. Some things can be shared. Some things can be supported. Then the month ends with a Sagittarius full moon on May 31st, in your 1st house. And this is your moment. After a month that began quietly, moved through practical adjustments, and brought relationships into focus, the ending brings everything back to you. Your identity, your direction, your needs, your truth. Something becomes clear. You may see yourself differently. You may realize what you are done with. You may feel ready to step into a different version of yourself. You may understand something about your direction that was not obvious at the beginning of the month. This is a release point, not of everything, but of the version of you that no longer fits. And that is powerful, because the 1st house is where life begins again. So May has a very clear flow for Sagittarius rising. It starts quietly, with something ending or shifting underneath the surface. It moves into your daily life, asking for practical changes. It brings relationships into focus and tests your boundaries. And it ends by bringing you back to yourself. Stronger, clearer, more aware of what you need and what you are no longer willing to carry. For Sagittarius rising, the key is simple. Do not ignore what the beginning of the month shows you, even if it is not loud. Use the middle of May to build a daily system that actually supports you. Be honest in the second half about what you can and cannot handle. And when the month ends, trust what becomes clear about who you are now. That is not confusion. That is alignment. That was your May 2026 predictions. If this helped you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. And if you'd like a personal consultation, feel free to contact me. I'll see you in the next video. Capricorn rising. May begins with the social picture. The full moon in Scorpio on May 1st lands in your 11th house, so the month opens through friends, groups, networks, alliances, audience, support systems, and the larger future you have been trying to build around yourself. That is where the first shift happens. Not in your private life yet. Not in romance yet. Not even in work, at least not directly. In the wider circle around you, the people, the plans, the long-range direction, the sense of who is actually part of what comes next. And that matters, because the 11th house is where you start seeing whether your future has the right people in it. Not just pleasant people, not just familiar people, the right people, the ones who fit where your life is actually going, not where it used to be. And when a full moon lands here, something about that becomes much clearer. A friendship may intensify. A group dynamic may show its real shape. A collaboration may either strengthen or start feeling less aligned. A long-term goal may suddenly become more real or more obviously flawed. This is not always dramatic from the outside. Sometimes it is just a very clean realization. Who energizes you? Who drains you? Who belongs in the next chapter? Who only belongs to a previous version of your life? Which plans still have momentum? Which ones have been kept alive more out of loyalty than actual conviction? That is the opening of May for Capricorn rising. And because Scorpio is involved, the feeling underneath it may be deeper than it first appears. There may be strong emotions around belonging, trust, loyalty, disappointment, or the quiet recognition that you have changed more than your environment has. That can be uncomfortable, but it is useful, because Capricorn often keeps moving long after something social has already gone flat. You can stay disciplined inside systems, groups, or obligations because you know how to function under weight. But the beginning of May asks a better question. Is this still alive? Is this still mutual? Is this still part of the future? Or are you carrying it because you have always carried it? That is a very important distinction. Then the month warms up. Mercury enters Taurus on May 2nd, and your fifth house becomes more active. That shifts the tone almost immediately. After a beginning focused on social alignment and future direction, the middle of May begins drawing your attention toward creativity, pleasure, romance, children, visibility, performance, and the part of life that is supposed to feel more human and less strategic. That is a good shift for you, because after the full moon shows you what is happening in the larger social field, Taurus asks a very different question. What is actually bringing you back to life? Not what is practical, not what is efficient, not what is respectable. What feels alive? That is the medicine in the middle of May. It gives you warmth where the opening may have felt cool, clarifying, or socially revealing. It brings your attention back to the heart side of life, not in a reckless way, in a grounded way. Taurus in the fifth house does not want chaos. It wants real enjoyment, real attraction, real creative momentum, real beauty, real contact with something that feels worth being present for. The Taurus new moon on the 16th is your reset point in the fifth house. That is where something new can begin. A new creative project, a new romantic chapter, a new relationship to joy, a new desire to be seen more fully, a new commitment to making space for pleasure instead of treating it like something that must always wait until later. This matters a great deal, because Capricorn can become extremely competent inside a life that has quietly gone emotionally flat. You can maintain the schedule, meet the expectation, fulfill the duty, and keep the structure standing. But the middle of May reminds you that life is not supposed to feel like one long act of endurance. There has to be fire in it too. For some Capricorn rising people, this new moon will land through romance. A connection begins. A feeling becomes more real. A part of you that had become guarded starts opening again. For others, it is creative. You remember what it feels like to make something because you want to, not because it is useful. And for some, it is even simpler than that. You just realize that you need more life in your life. That realization is not small. It changes the whole month. Because once the fifth house wakes up, the next question is not whether you can keep being responsible. Of course you can. The question is whether responsibility is still serving something worth being responsible for. Then late May brings the practical test. Mercury enters Gemini on May 17th. Mars enters Taurus on May 18th. Venus enters Cancer the same day. Gemini season begins on May 20th. Now your sixth house becomes active. So the month shifts from joy, desire, and creative renewal into work, routine, health, scheduling, duties, and the daily mechanics of life. That does not cancel the warmth of the middle of the month. It tests it. Can what is opening fit into your actual life? Can the romance survive the schedule? Can the creativity survive the workload? Can the pleasure survive the habits you have built? Can your body hold the pace you are asking it to hold? That is the late May question, and it is an honest one, because the sixth house is where everything either becomes alive or starts breaking down under pressure. Gemini here speeds things up. The calendar may get fuller. More conversations, more admin, more moving parts, more daily mental traffic. You may have to adapt quickly, think quickly, respond quickly, and keep several practical threads moving at once. This can feel busy, but it can also be useful because it shows you where your system is strong and where it needs to change. At the same time, Mars enters Taurus on the 18th, energizing your fifth house. That is important because while late May gets busier and more practical on the surface, the fire underneath does not go away. In fact, it gets stronger. Mars in the fifth adds desire, drive, courage, creative force, sexual energy, and a stronger refusal to ignore what you want. It can make romance hotter, creativity more urgent, self-expression more direct. It can also make you less patient with anything that feels stale, flat, or emotionally dead. That can be excellent for you, especially if the middle of the month has already shown you what wants to come alive. Mars says, now move with it. Not endlessly, not impulsively, but clearly. This is the part of the month where you may realize that joy is not something to fit in only when everything else is done. It is part of what gives everything else meaning. And once Mars enters your fifth house, that truth becomes harder to negotiate away. At the same time, Venus enters Cancer, activating your seventh house. That helps a lot because it softens the relationship field. It can bring more warmth, more tenderness, more emotional responsiveness, and a better tone in one-to-one dynamics. If the late month is asking you to balance your own desire with your daily responsibilities, Venus in Cancer helps by making connection feel more nourishing and less transactional. A partner may become sweeter. A client dynamic may become easier. A relationship conversation may soften. You may simply feel more open to emotional closeness than you have recently. That matters because it keeps the month from becoming all work and friction. There is softness here too. Receptivity, support, emotional intelligence, the sense that relationships do not always have to be handled like negotiations. Then the month ends by pulling you inward. The full moon in Sagittarius on May 31st lands in your 12th house. So after a beginning full of social sorting and future clarity, a middle focused on joy and creative renewal, and a second half that tests everything through work, routine, and the practical structure of your life, May closes quietly. Very quietly. This full moon is not usually loud on the outside, but it is strong on the inside. Something hidden becomes clearer. A pattern reaches its ending point. A quiet truth rises to the surface. An emotional cycle starts closing. You realize you are more tired than you thought, or more ready to let something go than you have admitted. This is an important ending, because it reminds you that no matter how social, productive, creative, or relational the month becomes, there is still an inner life underneath all of it. There is still a private self. There are still emotions, memories, and older patterns that need closure if the new chapter is going to be clean. And Sagittarius here brings honesty. Not the dramatic kind, the liberating kind. The kind that says, this is over. This no longer needs to be carried. This no longer needs to take up space in the background of my life. That can be deeply relieving, especially for Capricorn rising, because you often keep going without fully acknowledging what has already ended internally. The full moon on the 31st helps with that. It lets something loosen. It lets something leave. It lets the month end with less weight than it started with. So May has a very coherent shape for you. It begins by showing you who and what actually belong in your future. Then it brings warmth back through pleasure, romance, creativity, and the reminder that life needs more than duty. Then it tests everything through the daily system, the schedule, the body, and the practical mechanics of real life. And finally, it ends by asking for release. A quiet ending, a private clearing, a lighter internal state than the one you started with. That is a strong month, not because it is easy, because it moves in the right order. It sorts the social future first, then it reconnects you with the heart. Then it asks whether your daily life can actually support what is opening. And then it clears the background, so the next chapter is not carrying unnecessary residue. For Capricorn rising, the key is simple. Pay attention to who still belongs in the future and who does not. Do not treat joy like a luxury in the middle of the month. It is part of the correction. Let the second half show you what your routines need to become if you want more life, not less. And when the month ends, allow yourself to release what is already over inside you. That is not losing momentum. That is making room for the right one. That was your May 2026 predictions. If this helped you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. And if you'd like a personal consultation, feel free to contact me. I'll see you in the next video. Aquarius rising. May begins at the top of the chart. The full moon in Scorpio on May 1st lands in your 10th house, so the month opens through career, visibility, responsibility, reputation, authority, and the public role you have been carrying. That is where the first pressure gathers. Not in your friendships, not in romance, not in your private life, at least not at first. In the part of life people can see, the part with expectations attached to it. The part where effort becomes visible and where your direction either starts making sense or starts asking for revision. And that matters, because the 10th house is not casual. When it gets activated, something tends to crystallize. A work situation may reach a turning point. A decision about direction may become harder to postpone. A role may become more demanding. A boss, client, system, or pressure point may reveal its true shape. You may simply realize that the version of success you have been managing is no longer the version you want to keep building. That is often how this starts, not with a dramatic external announcement, with an internal recognition that the public story has shifted. And because Scorpio is involved, the feeling underneath this is rarely light. There may be deeper emotions around power, control, pressure, ambition, resentment, recognition, or the cost of holding yourself together in a visible role that asks a lot from you. The beginning of May can make that impossible to ignore. What are you building? What is it costing you? What part of your public life still feels meaningful? What part has become too heavy, too performative, or too draining to keep carrying in the same way? That is the opening question. And for Aquarius rising, that is useful, because you can endure a surprising amount when your mind is engaged and the future feels worth it. What wears you down is not always the workload itself. It is the feeling that the structure around the workload no longer reflects who you are becoming. The full moon shows you where that is happening. Then the month drops you back down to earth. Mercury enters Taurus on May 2nd, and your 4th house becomes more active. So after a beginning centered on public life, the middle of May shifts toward home, family, property, emotional foundations, and the private structure underneath everything else. That is a very smart correction, because once the opening of the month shows you what is happening at the top, the next honest question becomes, what is happening underneath it? How are you living? What is happening in the home? What is holding you emotionally? What is draining you privately? What does stability actually mean for you right now? This is where the month gets more intimate. Not necessarily emotional in an obvious way, but foundational. And Taurus here wants something simple and important, a base that can actually support the life you are trying to live. It wants peace where possible, reliability where needed, a home environment, family dynamic, or inner footing that is not constantly competing with the public pressure you are already carrying. The Taurus new moon on the 16th is your reset point in the 4th house. That means something can begin again at the level of home, family, roots, living situation, private life, or emotional structure. A move, a shift in household dynamics, a stronger boundary with family, a desire to create more peace where you live, a decision to stop building your outer life on top of an inner reality that is clearly under strain. This matters a great deal, because for Aquarius rising, there can be a tendency to keep the mind focused on what is next, what is changing, what is possible, what is intellectually or socially engaging. The middle of May says, fine, but what are you standing on? That is the real question. Not whether you can keep going. You can. Whether what you are standing on is strong enough to keep holding you while you do. For some Aquarius rising people, this new moon will be literal. A home decision, a property issue, a move, a change in who you live with, or how you are organizing your private life. For others, it is more internal, a shift in what safety means, a stronger awareness that emotional stability is not optional, a decision to stop treating rest, peace, or privacy like secondary concerns. And honestly, that can change more than it looks like it changes, because once the 4th house settles, the rest of the chart often starts working better. Then late May brings the light back in. Mercury enters Gemini on May 17th. Mars enters Taurus on May 18th. Venus enters Cancer the same day. Gemini season begins on May 20th. Now the month becomes more playful, expressive, and alive. Your 5th house becomes active, which means romance, creativity, pleasure, joy, attention, performance, children, and self-expression come forward. After a beginning shaped by pressure and a middle shaped by grounding, the second half of May starts asking a different question. Where is the life in all of this? That shift is good for you. Very good. because it reminds you that the point of building structure is not only to survive, it is to make room for a life that actually feels worth living. Gemini in the fifth house brings movement, flirtation, creativity, curiosity, humor, conversation, and a little more oxygen. Things can feel lighter. A romantic dynamic may become more active. A creative idea may start moving. You may feel more interested in being seen as a person, not just as a role. That is healthy, especially after a Scorpio full moon in the 10th. You need some aliveness in the second half of the month, and the chart gives it to you. But at the same time, Mars enters Taurus on the 18th, energizing your fourth house. So the foundation story is not done. In fact, it becomes more active. You may feel more motivated to fix something at home, more impatient with private instability, more ready to make a domestic decision, less willing to keep tolerating household stress, emotional clutter, or a living situation that is clearly not working as well as it should. This can be very productive. Mars in Taurus is not frantic, but it is determined. It adds force to the work you started in the middle of the month. It helps you stop endlessly thinking about what needs to change and actually start changing it. That may mean practical action, cleaning up, reorganizing, repairing, moving, setting clearer boundaries, making a family matter less vague. It may also mean something more emotional, a firmer line around what you need in order to feel settled. And that is important because the second half of the month is not asking you to choose between joy and stability. It is asking you to build enough stability that joy can actually happen. That is the wiser reading. At the same time, Venus enters Cancer, activating your sixth house. That is a welcome softening. It can bring more ease to work, better tone in the daily routine, a more caring relationship with the body, and a gentler atmosphere around duties and practical life. Daily tasks may feel less harsh. Health routines may feel more supportive. A work environment may become a little warmer. You may simply become more aware that the body responds better to care than to pressure. That matters, because without it, late May could easily become all output, all movement, all decisions. Venus in Cancer reminds you that tenderness is also a form of intelligence, especially in the sixth house. Then the month ends by clarifying the social future. The full moon in Sagittarius on May 31st lands in your 11th house. So after a beginning centered on public life, a middle focused on home and emotional foundations, and a second half that wakes up creativity, romance, and the need for more aliveness, May closes through friends, groups, networks, communities, support systems, audience, and the people around your future. That is a meaningful ending, because by then, you have already seen a lot. You have seen where public life is changing. You have started adjusting the foundation. You have remembered that pleasure and expression matter too. And now the final question becomes, who is actually with you in the next chapter? Which friendships still fit? Which groups still align? Which collaborations have real future in them? Which people energize the direction you are going? And which ones belong to an older version of your life? Sagittarius brings honesty here. Not cruelty, not drama, just a wider, clearer truth. You may realize your future needs different people around it, or fewer people, or better people, or more freedom inside the social structures you have been tolerating. A goal may become more visible. A community connection may become more important. A social dynamic may reveal itself as limiting rather than supportive. Whatever happens, the ending of May helps sort the larger field around you. And that is useful, because Aquarius rising often thinks in terms of systems, networks, ideas, and the future at large. The full moon on the 31st helps bring that future into focus by clarifying what and who actually belongs in it. So May has a very coherent shape for you. It begins by showing you what is happening in the visible, public part of life. Then it takes you inward and downward toward home, grounding, and what needs to become more stable underneath the role. Then it opens the heart a little more, bringing back pleasure, creativity, expression, and the reminder that life cannot be all structure. And finally, it closes by sorting the social future, the people, the plans, the direction, the wider field around the life you are building. That is a strong month. Not because it is simple, because it moves in the right order. First the public truth, then the private foundation, then the return of life and expression, then the wider future. For Aquarius rising, the key is simple. Take the career or visibility shift at the beginning of the month seriously. Use the middle to strengthen the ground underneath you instead of pretending you can build everything from the top down. Let the second half remind you that joy, creativity, and connection are not optional extras. And when the month ends, pay close attention to who still belongs in your future. That answer may be clearer than it has been in a long time. That was your May 2026 predictions. If this helped you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. And if you'd like a personal consultation, feel free to contact me. I'll see you in the next video. Pisces rising. May begins by opening the horizon. The full moon in Scorpio on May 1st lands in your 9th house, so the month opens through travel, study, teaching, publishing, legal matters, belief, worldview, and the larger direction of your life. Right away, the feeling is bigger than the immediate moment. Something wants more space, more honesty, more perspective, more meaning. This is not the kind of beginning that gets stuck in minor details for long. It wants the wider truth, and that matters, because the 9th house is where life starts asking whether the path you are on still reflects what you actually believe. Not what is convenient, not what other people expect, not what looks reasonable from the outside. What feels true enough to build a future around? That is the opening question of May for Pisces rising. Where are you going? Not just physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, practically. What direction is your life taking? And does that direction still make sense to you? A Scorpio full moon here can bring a realization. A travel matter may become more urgent. A legal or administrative process may reach a turning point. A publishing, teaching, or educational path may become clearer. Or more simply, you may feel a very strong awareness that the life you are living has become too narrow for who you are becoming. That is often how this begins. Not with one dramatic external event, with the unmistakable feeling that your world needs to widen. For some Pisces rising people, this will be literal. Plans involving travel, relocation, study, immigration, legal processes, or long-range movement can suddenly become more real. For others, it is internal. A belief changes, a perspective opens, a truth you have been circling around finally becomes too important to keep postponing. And because Scorpio is involved, the feeling is rarely casual. This is not vague wanderlust. It is deeper than that. What have you outgrown? What truth are you ready to admit? What future are you no longer willing to postpone? What part of your life has become too small for what you now know? That is what the full moon is pulling into focus. Then the month gets practical. Mercury enters Taurus on May 2nd, and your 3rd house becomes more active. So after a beginning full of bigger picture awareness, the middle of May starts bringing your attention down into the immediate world. Communication, writing, paperwork, contracts, short trips, logistics, decisions, siblings, neighbors, scheduling, and all the small but necessary movements that turn a vision into something real. This is a very useful shift, because Pisces can absolutely feel the larger meaning of something before the practical plan is visible. Taurus helps with that. It grounds the vision. It slows things down enough for a workable next step to appear. It says, yes, the horizon matters, but what is the next conversation? What is the next decision? What is the next document? What is the next clear move you can make from where you are now? That correction is important, because a bigger truth without a practical structure underneath, it can stay theoretical for too long. The middle of May helps prevent that. It brings the focus closer. What needs to be said? What needs to be answered? What needs to be organized? What has to move from feeling into language? What has to move from possibility into process? This is where the month becomes more workable. The Taurus new moon on the 16th is your reset point in the 3rd house. That means something new can begin through communication, planning, paperwork, writing, speaking, agreements, local movement, or the way you are mentally organizing the path ahead. A new conversation can begin, a new contract, a new content project, a new idea that becomes more concrete, a new way of thinking about something that had been mentally stuck. A decision that looks small from the outside, but quietly redirects the month. That is what makes this new moon valuable. It is not flashy. It is useful. And for Pisces rising, useful can be powerful when it arrives at the right moment. Because once you know the larger truth, the next task is not to feel it more intensely. It is to translate it, to put it into sentences, systems, appointments, messages, and choices that other people can respond to and that you can actually build on. The middle of May helps with that. It gives shape to what might otherwise stay intuitive. Then late May changes the emotional center of gravity. Mercury enters Gemini on May 17th. Mars enters Taurus on May 18th. Venus enters Cancer the same day. Gemini season begins on May 20th. Now your fourth house becomes active. That means home, family, private life, emotional foundations, roots, and the place you return to when the outside world gets loud all become much more important. So the bigger vision at the beginning of the month and the practical planning in the middle start leading you somewhere very specific. Back to the foundation. That makes sense. Because once the future begins opening, the next real question is whether your home life, your emotional structure, and your private world are able to support it. What needs to change at home? What needs to settle? What family dynamic is now impossible to ignore? What emotional truth is asking for more space? What kind of private life do you actually need if the public or outer direction is changing? This is where late May gets more personal. Gemini here can bring more conversations at home, more movement around living arrangements, more mental activity in the private sphere, or simply a stronger awareness that your inner world needs just as much attention as your external plans. There can be more thinking, more talking, more deciding around domestic matters. And at the same time, Mars enters Taurus on the 18th, energizing your third house. That is significant, because now the communication and logistics story that began in the middle of the month gets force behind it. Conversations may become more direct. Paperwork may start moving. You may feel more motivated to make calls, write messages, set things up, ask questions, negotiate, clarify, and stop waiting for things to somehow organize themselves. This can be excellent for you, especially if the beginning of May has already made it clear that something larger is trying to shift. Mars in Taurus helps you follow through. It makes you less passive, less willing to sit in uncertainty, more likely to push the practical side of the process forward. The only caution here is tone, because Mars in the third can make the mind sharper, the words faster, and the patience thinner. If you are frustrated, that can show. If you are tired of vague answers, that can show too. Used well, this transit helps you cut through confusion. Used poorly, it can make every conversation feel like a test. So late May works best when you stay intentional. Say what you mean. Ask the real question. Do not waste time. But do not let irritation become your whole communication style. That is the balance. And Venus entering Cancer helps a lot with that. It activates your fifth house, bringing warmth, softness, attraction, creativity, romance, pleasure, beauty, and emotional sweetness into the second half of the month. This is one of the nicer shifts in May for you. It reminds you that even while you are sorting practical decisions and home matters, there is also room for affection, art, joy, desire, and emotional expression. That is very welcome. A romantic connection may feel easier. Creativity may return more naturally. You may feel more playful, more visible, more emotionally generous. A child-related matter may become sweeter. Or you may simply remember that life is not only made of logistics and future planning. That matters, because without Venus in Cancer, May could become all direction and decision. Venus softens it. It lets the heart stay involved in a healthy way. Then the month ends at the top of the chart. The full moon in Sagittarius on May 31st lands in your 10th house. So after a beginning focused on the larger future, a middle focused on practical planning, and a second half that turns toward home, roots, and private life, the month closes through career, visibility, responsibility, public identity, and what your outer life is becoming. That ending is important because it shows you where all of this has been leading, not just toward inner clarity, toward outer change. A work matter may culminate, a professional truth may become clearer, a decision about direction may suddenly look more obvious, a public role may shift, a recognition may arrive that what has been changing internally and privately now needs to become visible in the real world. That is the final movement of May for Pisces rising. The month starts by expanding your horizon. Then it helps you build the practical bridge. Then it asks whether your home life can support the shift. And finally, it shows you what this means for the public shape of your life. That is a strong sequence because it moves in the right order. First the vision, then the plan, then the foundation, then the visible outcome. And that is why May can be so useful for you. It does not just make you feel more. It helps you move what you feel into form. For Pisces rising, the key is simple. Take the bigger realization at the beginning of the month seriously. Use the middle of May to get practical instead of waiting for more signs. Let the second half show you what needs to change underneath the surface for the future to work. And when the month ends, pay attention to what becomes visible about your direction. The path is not abstract anymore. It is starting to take shape. That was your May 2026 predictions. If this helped you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. And if you'd like a personal consultation, feel free to contact me. I'll see you in the next video.